Hey RotoBallers, I'm Pierre, the Roto Chef, and here to help you with, as always, your lineup decisions for running back, and this time it's for week 9. 4 teams on bye, not too many running backs injured this week, of course, unless you had the RB1 in all of fantasy and the guy who was leading you to first place, Derrick Henry. Other than that, it was a pretty light week. Now, obviously, you need some help there. Check out, as always, our waiver wire videos, our waiver wire articles. We have you covered from front to back as far as what to do in situations like that. Now, besides replacing the RB1, there are some RB3 types, flex plays that you want to consider this week. As always, here to help you with those tough decisions. I'm going to give you 3 names that I feel are must start among that group, not the guys that are your usual set and forget, although, these days at running back, there's just not too many of those anyways. And then I'll give you a couple names that I think are must sits, even though you've been riding with them. So let's get into it, talk about my first running back. I actually going to throw him as a must start, even though he was just picked up off the waiver wire scrap heap this week because everybody, including myself, ran out to get Kenny Gainwell. And of course, we were fooled into thinking that he might be the guy. And he basically just ate up some garbage time in the fourth quarter of the blowout win. It was going to be a smash spot for him, but instead, it was a smash spot for Boston Scott. That's right, Boston Scott, who hadn't appeared in any of the games for the Eagles all year except for one, and he took like 4 snaps in that game. And so, of course, he was the lead back this past week. Is going to be the lead back and the starter again next week. Why wouldn't he be, right? I think he is. It seems obvious that that's what Nick Sirianni wants to do for whatever reason. So Jordan Howard will spell him occasionally in short yardage and goal line, which is going to be also super frustrating. But, they both scored 2 touchdowns. Scott did pretty well. You got to admit, with the touches he was given, 60 yards and 12 carries. I know it was Detroit, but believe it or not, this week is actually a better matchup on paper going against the Chargers. That's right, the Chargers actually allow the most rushing yards per game to the running back position. No team does it worse. So the Chargers have been a complete run funnel defense all year long. Boston Scott's still the starter. He's got a good shot to put up numbers similar to last week. Maybe he won't score 2 touchdowns, but look, he actually might get more yardage and might get more touches if this game is competitive because, again, Gainwell came in the fourth to spell him just to, clean up, I guess. So you've got to like Boston Scott, this week. I'd say you picked him up. You're desperate at running back probably. You roll with him. He's actually in a pretty good spot. All right, number 2 really should be number 1 is Elijah Mitchell here. I mean, at this point, let's just say he's an every week must start RB2. He's a guy who led the league in rushing at the running back position last week. He was the ground player of the week, and he's somebody who now in 5 career starts, he has 300 plus yard games, 137 last week. He's getting better as the season goes on, and he's not even seeing 20 plus carries a game. So it's pretty obvious that they found something special with him. It wasn't Trey Sermon, it's Mitchell who is the guy, and he's the only guy. Again, no other running back is even getting involved. JaMychal Hasty will get thrown a bone or 2, maybe 2 carries here, and that's it. So Mitchell is going to get the work. He's on a team that, well, they're going to have to run to protect, their kind of lack of passing game with Garoppolo, who really puts up big numbers out of necessity, not because he's a super efficient quarterback. So you got to like Mitchell, and then this week it's not a bad matchup against the Cardinals. You think Cardinals might force the Niners to pass it more, but Kyler Murray, remember, he's banged up, so even if he plays, we might not see that same dynamic Arizona offense. I feel this being a divisional battle, it's going to be a little bit more, I wouldn't say a slugfest, but it's going to be a closer score. It's not going to be necessarily a high-scoring affair as some people might think it will be. So you got to like Mitchell, plug him in there, no doubt starter this week and pretty much rest of the season if nothing changes. Speaking of changes, so Derrick Henry is gone. Who replaces him? Of course, it's Adrian Peterson, picked up off the street, and he's going to be your starter most likely, but he's not the guy you should be most interested in fantasy. I know you've seen coverage of this in terms of waiver wire pickups this week. Jeremy McNichols is actually the guy that should get the most fantasy attention. Now, again, when we say the word replace Derrick Henry, there's nobody that they could have traded for, picked up, added, anywhere that will replace Derrick Henry. We know this, right? But McNichols will probably be the one who does the most in terms of fantasy because he's the pass catcher. He's got 21 catches this year. Not a lot, right? But not involved. But that's because nobody else was really involved in Tennessee's backfield because they didn't need to be. Well, now they need to be. Okay, so Henry isn't there to occupy 95% of the team share in carries anymore. McNichols will get a few carries here and there, but it's probably going to be Peterson on the ground. But McNichols will be the pass catcher, and that's probably a role that's going to be more important to the Titans this week, especially going against the Rams. There's a good chance that they're going to be playing from behind, or at least they're going to need to pass a lot more than they want to. Well, also because they don't have Derrick Henry to run the ball. So you have to like the fact that McNichols is going to get probably several receptions and, chances for a touchdown. Maybe not this week, but still, if you have a guy who can catch several passes and maybe upwards of 60, 70 yards, you got yourself double digits, and that is good enough these days at the running back position. So if you picked him up, especially, you spent all that fab, you might as well roll him out there. Again, this could be favorable game script for a guy like him. Now, as far as the must-sits, so James Robinson, this could come back to bite me because maybe he gets ruled out and he doesn't even play, in which case I guess it came true that you should have sat him. But I'm going to say even if he does play, he's day-to-day with that bruised heel, not a major injury. Maybe they rest him, but does it matter at this point? It's the Jaguars. What are they resting him for? Not the playoffs. And so James Robinson probably will play. Because, again, day-to-day sounds like he's getting in some practice work. He'll be okay. So if he does, is he going to be a full go, 100% usual workload? Maybe not. Maybe Carlos Hyde gets a little bit more involved. They did sign Devine Ozigbo from the Saints practice squad, an old Jaguar, brought him back. So that tells you that maybe they have plans to use somebody else also. And then even if he does play, it probably doesn't matter. Going against the Buffalo Bills, this is the number one defense in terms of limiting fantasy points to running backs. So even if he had a full 100% James Robinson with no injury last week, it's still a terrible matchup. It's still going to be the Jaguars playing from behind even more than usual. So you can't like his chances for a big game. And so I'm just going to stay away and take my chances on somebody else. And then likewise, look, Khalil Herbert has been great. He's been exactly what you would hope you got in Damien Williams when you spent all that fab on him. But if you picked up Herbert for a buck or you picked him up the next week after he shined, then you've got to love the fact that he is producing basically equivalent to what David Montgomery was doing before he got hurt. So Herbert has been on a roll, and this Bears offense is still going to be primarily a run-first offense because they can't really pass it. But still, this is a very tough matchup going against Pittsburgh Steelers. Look, this game itself is going to have one of the lowest totals of the week. The implied total right now is at 39.5 points is the over-under. That's pretty low, and of course, the Bears are an underdog here by 6. Not a lot of points expected, so Herbert gonna have a tough time trying to score a touchdown. He's probably not gonna have a big game because the Steelers are one of the best at limiting touchdowns and yardage to running backs. They've only allowed 2 running backs to score a touchdown, and in 5 of 7 games, they've allowed less than 100 yards rushing. So Herbert isn't a complete must sit in terms of anywhere you have him. You just have to bench him. But in most leagues, I hope you have a better option. Let's just put it that way. This isn't going to be a big week for him. So I'm going to pivot elsewhere because this might be his last week of fantasy relevance if David Montgomery comes back. So I also say this is a good time to try to trade him. All right, so there you have it. Those are my picks for week 9 at running back. Do this also for wide receivers, so check out that video as well. And of course, keep it locked on RotoBaller all weekend long for the latest updates.